Number 10. Anabella Dukes. One day in 2021, a young man left his family's Albuquerque home during the early morning hours to meet a girl from Snapchat. Little did he know, he was the target of a robbery that was about to go horribly wrong. After arriving to pick the girl up, he was yanked out of his vehicle and allegedly held at gunpoint by 4 suspects who demanded money, jewelry, and a gun. They took anything of value that they could find on him, then forced the victim back into his car and started driving to his house. Along the way, they ordered him to call his brother, 24-year-old Elias Otero, and tell him to come outside with money and a gun. If Otero didn't come outside, the carjackers said they would murder the victim. When they arrived, Otero exited the house and threatened to shoot his younger brother's kidnappers. One of the suspects pulled a gun and shot Otero, who died from his injuries. The alleged gunman, Adrian Avila, and the accused mastermind behind the plot, 18-year-old Anabella Dukes, remained on the run for nearly a year. Avila finally surrendered in late 2021, and Dukes was captured the next month. They face a laundry list of charges, including murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and tampering with evidence. Number 9. Matthew Dylan Ramirez. In 2021, a young man named Matthew Dylan Ramirez was recruited by a human smuggling organization on Snapchat. He agreed to pick up some illegal immigrants in the Arizona desert and drive them to Phoenix for $1,000. Another man working for the smuggling ring, named Jesus Madrid Varela, guided 3 Mexican migrants on foot into Arizona, where Ramirez came and picked them up. During the drive, a Tohono O'odham Nation policeman tried to pull the vehicle over, but Ramirez was already going more than 100 miles per hour, 161 kilometers per hour, and the officer was unable to safely catch up. Ramirez lost control of the vehicle, causing it to roll multiple times. All the passengers were ejected, and a 36-year-old woman died. The other 3 passengers were injured but survived. During questioning, Ramirez admitted to working for a smuggling organization. Both Ramirez and Madrid Varela pleaded guilty in federal court to conspiracy and transportation of illegal aliens for profit, resulting in death. Ramirez faces up to life in prison and a fine of up to $250,000, while Madrid Varela signed a plea agreement and is expected to serve roughly 3 to 5 years. Number 8. Manden Watts. After getting into a heated argument with another young man on Snapchat one day in 2022, 18-year-old Manden Watts challenged his adversary to meet at a cemetery in Pennsylvania for a real fight. Taking a power in numbers approach, the young man recruited 6 of his friends to go with him. But when they saw Watts pointing what looked like a gun at them, they fled the scene. Watts messaged the teen on Snapchat and claimed that the weapon was just an airsoft gun and persuaded him to return to the cemetery for the planned fight. The young man and his friends piled into 2 cars and drove back to the site, where Watts waited on an ATV wearing all black and a ski mask. He guided the vehicles into the cemetery, but disappeared briefly at some point. Moments later, Watts re-emerged on the 4-wheeler. He pulled a handgun from his waistband and began shooting at the teens, who immediately fled the scene. Watts fired 5 shots total. Luckily, nobody was injured. Pennsylvania state troopers followed ATV tracks at the crime scene to a nearby house where they questioned Watts. They found a 4-wheeler parked inside a shed and a ski mask similar to the one the suspect was said to be wearing during the shooting. Watts refused to voluntarily share his Snapchat information with investigators, who obtained a warrant and discovered, based on his username, that he was the person interacting with the victims in the time leading up to the crime. He was federally charged with multiple counts each of criminal attempted homicide, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, simple assault, and reckless endangerment. Number 7. Simon Salamon. When a woman in Oxfordshire, England, began chatting with Simon Salamon on Snapchat in 2021, she initially thought it seemed like they had a lot in common. They exchanged phone numbers and eventually met up, at which point the woman changed her mind and decided she didn't want to date Salamon. She told him she had a lot going on at the time and tried to end their correspondence. But Salamon refused to accept the rejection, and he began harassing the woman relentlessly. The day after Valentine's Day in 2022, he called her 350 times. He showed up at her apartment complex the next day and told her that he wasn't going to leave unless she agreed to speak with him later that day. The victim threatened to call the police, but it failed to deter Salamon from continuing to torment her. He messaged her constantly and grew increasingly angry the more she ignored him. A judge granted an order of protection and set a return court date for Salamon. He failed to attend, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Salamon pleaded guilty to stalking and was still awaiting sentencing at the last update. Number 6. Mariah Lopez. A San Antonio woman in her 70s endured hours of horrific abuse one day in June of 2022 when a relative attacked her in her bedroom and broadcasted the assault on Snapchat. The family member blamed the elderly victim for animal control taking their dogs away and accused her of owing them money. They poured a bottle of water over her head and pushed her cane up against her neck. When the senior citizen tried to leave the room, the suspect stopped her and ordered her into a bathroom, where they held her for at least an hour and a half. The campaign of terror continued when the suspect sent the victim into the living room, where they dumped more water on her head, threatened her, and pushed and slapped her with a knife in their hand. Someone who witnessed the attacker's Snapchat videos alerted a relative of the victim, who recognized the suspect in the footage as 31-year-old Mariah Lopez. Before rushing over there, the relative called Lopez, who said that the elderly woman was sleeping. By the time the family member arrived, Lopez was gone, and the victim's purse and phone were missing. Authorities charged Lopez with injury to the elderly, unlawful restraint, terroristic threat of a family member, and theft between $750 and $2,500. Number 5. Kobe Malik Woods. In early 2021, authorities in Smith County, Virginia, noticed an unusually large amount of illegal pills flooding into the area. An investigation ensued and a number of suspects were identified, but one of the biggest breaks came when law enforcement intercepted a package from California containing 800 fentanyl pills addressed to 19-year-old Kobe Malik Woods. It was a troubling discovery, especially in a region that has been especially hard hit during the ongoing opioid epidemic. Detectives performed a controlled delivery at the recipient's home, which, in this case, meant that the postal carrier delivered the parcel as usual, while the feds remained staked out nearby. After seeing someone take the package inside, agents approached the home armed with a search warrant. Woods allegedly tried to flee with the package in hand, but was quickly captured near his home. The investigation found that he had ordered the pills on Snapchat. At a time when fentanyl is ruining and claiming lives across the US, the seizure marked another win in law enforcement's relentless fight against deadly narcotics. Woods pleaded guilty to possession with the intent to distribute more than 40 grams of fentanyl and received a 3.5-year prison sentence. Number 4. William Underwood. In 2019, a young Texas man named William Underwood was about to enter his senior year of high school when he instead landed himself in a jail cell. It all started when the teen met up with 19-year-old Ryan Bates outside an apartment complex in Harris County, supposedly to buy some marijuana. A witness would later report seeing Underwood tasing Bates, then getting into his car. She heard gunshots just moments later, and Bates was dead. Shortly after the shooting, Underwood made a Snapchat video at the murder scene. During questioning, he told detectives a few different stories about what happened. According to one version, Underwood thought that Bates was about to rob him, so he tased the victim and then shot him. He then got rid of his clothes and made a Snapchat post. He was soon charged with murder. The prosecutor accused him of trying to establish an alibi by going to his sister's apartment and using Snapchat there, hoping that it would make it look like he never left the house. But plenty of people had already seen the video, putting him at the crime scene. Underwood's lawyer claimed that his client shot Bates in self-defense and was extremely upset about the situation. The victim's father, on the other hand, told ABC News that the two young men didn't know each other and that he believed Underwood randomly targeted his son. Number 3. Christopher Cowan. Starting in 2020, 6 Scottish women were harassed incessantly on Snapchat by a man named Christopher Cowan, who used various profiles to send them unwanted explicit photos and messages. In its coverage of the case, the Courier described how Cowan also sent the victims images of a male avatar peeking through blinds and hiding in bushes, as if to convey that he enjoyed making them uncomfortable. It caused some of the women to worry that he was following them. After one victim blocked the troll, he reached out to a friend of hers and repeatedly asked him to tell her to unblock him. Another woman went on 4 dates with Cowan and later received explicit messages from 10 different phone numbers, whom she believed were all him, because the language and the nature of the comments were similar. Cowan even showed up at her workplace where her co-workers told him to leave her alone, and he continued contacting her to the point where she got a security alarm and surveillance cameras installed in her home. One of the women had pressed charges against the suspect in the past, but wound up back in court after a conviction failed to stop him from bothering her. During the investigation, officers visited Cowan's home and noticed that his bedding matched the bedding in the background of one of the explicit photos he sent. Despite this, he maintained that someone else sent the photos. His lawyer suggested that loneliness and boredom triggered his behavior, but the judge saw that as no excuse and sentenced him to 2 years in prison. Number 2. Irina Alexandra Restiano. During the summer of 2022, 22-year-old Irina Alexandra Restiano went on 2 dates with a man she met on a dating app. His name was Joseph Collins, and the two wound up having a one-night stand at a hotel near Warrington, England. When Collins told her that he couldn't see her for 3 weeks due to work commitments, she barraged him with 150 Snapchat messages in just 4 days, making it difficult for him to chat with others through the app. Collins called the police and asked them to issue Restiano a verbal warning to leave him alone, but it didn't stop her from calling his workplace and telling his co-workers that he was abusing narcotics, which turned out not to be true. She then threatened to call his past employers and tell the same lie. Restiano was arrested for stalking. In court, Collins said that he sank into a depression and wasn't his normal self. He struggled to focus at his job and lost his sense of humor while he grew increasingly worried about how bad the harassment would get. The traumatized young man eventually became consumed by the situation and said that it was all he could think about, making him feel even more powerless. He also worried that going to the police might make things worse. Collins was granted a restraining order and Restiano pleaded guilty to stalking. She was ordered to pay some fines and perform community service, and was banned from contacting or going near the victim for 2 years. Her behavior left Collins feeling so traumatized that he deleted Snapchat and the dating app he met Restiano on. He told the court that it'll be a while before he'll be able to trust someone enough to get romantically involved. Number 1. Felonious flash mobs. In 2021, throngs of fast-moving thieves began conducting large-scale robberies of retail stores in California's Bay Area and several other parts of the US, including Chicago, Los Angeles, and Minneapolis. These groups, often numbering in the dozens, inflict heavy losses on stores, often to the tune of tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. This marked the first time law enforcement had ever observed the organization tactics that the groups used. Participants coordinated through social media and were often strangers. It made it difficult for investigators to track down suspects, since a lot of the time, people didn't know much about their fellow thieves and couldn't provide meaningful information. In many cases, just a handful of suspects, if any, are arrested. For example, just 3 people have been charged since 90 people stormed a Nordstrom store in the Bay Area in November of 2021, making off with more than $100,000 of merchandise in less than 1 minute. According to the Wall Street Journal, authorities identified Snapchat as one of the social media platforms that the planners of flash mob events use. A Snap spokesperson claimed that the company had investigated the claim but found no evidence of that type of activity, which would be considered a violation of the app's terms. A member of law enforcement officer told WSJ that flash mob organizers tend to prefer the disappearing message feature, which could be why the company found no signs of people using the app in violation of its terms of service. While things have somewhat quieted down since the 2021 spate of flash mob thefts, these crimes continue and are starting to happen in more places, and the use of social media to organize the crimes ahead of time is particularly troubling.
9. Jodie Herring. Vermont prosecutor Scott Williams was at a gym in downtown Bara one day in 2015 when he heard gunshots. He ran outside where he saw a colleague on the ground with a gunshot wound and a woman standing nearby with a hunting rifle in her hand. Williams tackled the shooter and took her gun, then comforted social worker Lara Sobel during her dying moments. The killer, 40-year-old Jodie Herring, had recently lost custody of her daughter. She blamed Sobel, who worked for the county's Department for Children and Families, and wanted revenge. After killing her aunt and 2 cousins, whom she believed reported her to the DCF, Herring went to the office building where Sobel worked and waited for her to leave for the day. While being taken into custody, Herring was disturbingly calm, making small talk and laughing about what she'd just done as if it were a normal, everyday activity. Her adult daughter, Desiree, told news outlet VT Digger that her mother had a long history in family court, including the removal of 2 of her daughters from the home. She was also disgruntled when her granddaughter was taken away from Desiree, who condemned her mother's actions but said that she could understand why Herring disliked the people at Children's Services and eventually snapped. Herring pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison. But the conclusion of the case did little to heal the lasting emotional scars of those affected by the crimes, including Williams, who resigned from his position as a state attorney to deal with post-traumatic stress. 8. Dorothy Lee Barnett. Dorothy Lee Barnett lost custody of her infant daughter Savannah in 1994 over her wealthy, estranged husband's claims that she abused him during their marriage. She would later claim that her husband, Benjamin Harris Todd III, was the abuser, and she would use it as her reason for fleeing South Carolina with their 11-month-old during a supervised visit. Barnett's disappearance was meticulously planned. She changed her appearance, obtained fake identity documents for her and Savannah, and set aside enough money to start a new life. An international manhunt ensued, but law enforcement failed to catch up with Dorothy and Savannah, who spent time in Germany, France, Malaysia, Singapore, South Africa, and Botswana before ultimately ending up in Australia. Along the way, Dorothy remarried and changed her and Savannah's name for a second time. During her nearly 20 years on the run, authorities depicted her as bitter, mentally ill, and possibly dangerous, the same way Harris Todd had described her in family court. She was finally captured in 2013 while living in Queensland, where she was well liked among her neighbors. Dorothy was deported to the US and served 21 months in prison for her crimes. Savannah, who's now an adult, stood by her mother. She told the press that Dorothy was a great mother who gave her a stable upbringing, contrary to the demonizing way she was described during her custody battle with Todd. Now that she's done with her time, Dorothy wants to return to Australia where Savannah lives, but the country has refused to allow her to move back. 7. Jorge Morales II. Janet Concepcion was alarmed when her little boy Jojo told her in 2021 that his father planned to take him away to a farm and that he hoped she would join them. But she continued to honor her court-ordered visitation agreement with the boy's father, 45-year-old Jorge Morales II, and things continued as usual for the next year. Concepcion's worst nightmare came true in August of 2022, when Jojo disappeared from Miami with Morales and his mother, 68-year-old Lilian Pena Morales. An Amber Alert was issued for the little boy, who was captured in surveillance footage at a Walgreens in Maine 2 days later. The suspects ditched the SUV they were traveling in near the Canadian border and have not been spotted since. Investigators believe that Morales spent months planning his son's kidnapping and that they're hiding out somewhere in eastern Canada. According to the last update, they may be in New Brunswick. Both the FBI and the US Marshals are searching for the fugitives and the little boy, who reportedly has medical needs. A $10,000 reward is being offered for information leading to JoJo's safe return. 6. Stephanie Russell. Stephanie Russell lost custody of her kids in 2020 for making false abuse allegations against her ex-husband in court and was relegated to supervised visits. The 52-year-old pediatrician from Louisville, Kentucky, decided that the best way to deal with the problem was to eliminate her ex from the equation. She found someone who said they were willing to kill her ex for a fee and agreed to pay $7,000 to get the job done. To show that she was serious, she left the first half in a drop box outside her office with plans to pay the second half once the victim was dead. But the hitman was actually an FBI agent, and in 2022 Russell was federally charged for the murder-for-hire plot. Attorney John Harrelson, who represented Russell's ex-husband in the divorce and custody dispute, told local station WLKY that the experience was like constantly swinging at balls in a tennis match. He said that the battle involved a lot of frivolous motions and meetings with Louisville's Crimes Against Children's unit. If convicted, Russell faces up to 10 years in prison with no possibility of early parole. 5. David Barnes. A Texas man named David Barnes was faced with a nightmarish mess when his ex-wife Svetlana Koptyeva violated a court-ordered custody agreement and fled to Russia with their 2 children in 2019. He traveled to Russia in early 2022 in hopes of seeing his kids and maybe even bringing them back to the US, but was detained in Moscow on allegations of abusing his kids years earlier. Koptyeva had made similar accusations against Barnes during their lengthy divorce and custody battle in the US, but came out on the losing end of it when investigators found no evidence to back up the claims. She's now wanted on a felony charge of interfering with child custody while Barnes languishes in a Russian jail. David's sister, Carol Barnes, told ABC News that her brother was never out for revenge against his ex-wife, and that he wanted both himself and Koptyeva to have an active and present role in the kids' lives. But Svetlana allegedly did everything in her power to keep the children from him, even when doing so meant breaking the law and leaving the country. As diplomatic tensions between the US and Russia grow increasingly tense amid the ongoing war in Ukraine, a negotiation between the two countries for Barnes' release seems unlikely. For now, he remains in Moscow's Detention Center 5, which is known for its deplorable conditions. Former Marine Trevor Reed, who was held there in 2019 for allegedly assaulting 2 police officers, described the jail as being rat-infested and extremely dirty in an ABC interview. By the time he was released, his weight had dropped dangerously low from malnutrition and he was coughing up blood. The Barnes family, along with David's friends and employer, have appeared on national news in hopes that high-ranking government officials will hear their pleas and do everything possible to get him released. 4. Chris Williams. After getting married, Chris Williams and her wife Rebecca Wilson decided they wanted a child. Wilson carried the baby, but Williams was equally involved in their son's life, making her no less of a parent than Wilson. But a court didn't see it that way, when the now estranged couple went through a nasty split that saw them fighting over the little boy's custody. At a hearing in 2022, a judge ruled that because Williams had not adopted the child, she was not his legal parent. By then, the boy was 2 years old. She had been in his life consistently since day one, and he knew her as one of his 2 mothers. Williams was nevertheless removed from her son's birth certificate, and the judge ordered for the sperm donor that the woman used to be listed as the father. To complicate matters even more, the sperm donor decided that he wanted to be involved in the child's life and became a third contender in the already complicated fight. Williams made it clear that she planned to continue fighting for her parental rights, and as the case gained airplay, the Oklahoma ACLU announced its plans to step in and help if the case escalated to the state's appellate court. Thankfully, the judge reversed her decision and ordered for Williams to be reinstated on her son's birth certificate. While it marks a step toward reuniting her with her son, she still faces an uphill battle and is unable to have contact with her son as long as a 5-year protective order that Wilson has against her remains in place. 3. Neil Bartia. A 46-year-old lawyer from Fairfield, Connecticut already faced a mounting pile of personal and legal issues when he refused to let his 2 kids and a mediator leave his house at the end of a supervised visit one day in 2022. Neil Bartia eventually let them go, and when the cop showed up at his house, he claimed not to remember what happened and smelled of booze, according to police. He posted bond and was due in court the next day for a previous charge of violating a restraining order, but failed to show up. When police arrived at Bartia's home to arrest him for skipping court, he barricaded himself inside. Officers soon began to smell natural gas and promptly evacuated the neighborhood. A SWAT negotiator tried persuading Bartia to at least talk to him from a window, but he refused, and the team forced him out by spraying a chemical agent into the house. At his arraignment, the prosecutor urged the judge to set a high bail. Attorney Eugene Riccio, who represented Bartia's ex-wife, said that his client and her child had endured years of trauma and argued that Bartia is a danger to both his family and the community. He faces a slew of charges, including at least 12 domestic violence-related counts, some of which are from before the more recent incidents that landed him back in police custody. Court records show that Bartia was entangled in a lengthy divorce and custody battle that had dragged on for more than 5 years. Bail was set at $2 million, and he was still in custody, according to the last update. 2. Ted Hudico. In 2019, Ted Hudico's wife told him that she was leaving him and that their teenage son, now identified as transgender. Unwilling to put the matter on hold and discuss it at a time when Ted wasn't caught up in a work project, she abruptly left their home in the San Francisco Bay Area with the couple's 2 kids. In an effort to better understand what his child was going through and vowing to keep an open mind, he researched gender dysphoria and the transitioning process. He was concerned about the possible effects of puberty blockers and estrogen and wanted the teen to avoid medically transitioning until they were sure it was what they wanted. In court, the judge asked Ted if he thinks being transgender is a sin. He answered no, but was stripped of all his parental rights, yet was allowed to continue seeing his other son. He completely lost contact with his transitioning child, who's now 18 and free to make their own medical decisions. Speaking with the press in early 2022, Ted said that the two hadn't spoken in 3 years despite his attempts to reconnect. He's accepted that the kid he once knew as his son is now his daughter, and said that he hopes they can someday rebuild their relationship. 1. Carly Morris. When Carly Morris ended her marriage to her daughter's father, he returned to Saudi Arabia, where he was originally from, and left their little girl Tala with Carly in the United States. In 2019, he asked Carly to bring their daughter, who was then 5 years old, for a visit. She agreed, but things went terribly wrong a week into their visit, when her ex asked for her and Tala's travel documents so he could process their exit visa. Carly handed the documents over, but never got them back. She would later learn that her ex was using the documents to transfer Tala's citizenship to Saudi Arabia, where dual citizenship is not recognized. This effectively gave Tala's father sole custody and made Carly powerless to take her back to the US without his permission. The next thing she knew, she was spending each day alone in a windowless hotel room with no internet access, while her ex picked Tala up in the morning and returned her late at night. 2 years passed before Carly began reaching out to US politicians and diplomats for help. She finally won custody of Tala, but no decision-making power over major aspects of the girl's life. Carly is also banned from leaving Riyadh as she faces a criminal charge for speaking out about her struggle. The prosecution is seeking prison time, and the conviction could come with a death sentence. According to the Human Rights Foundation, around 50 American women who have children with Saudi nationals are fighting to get their kids out of the country. A battle that many women from Canada, the United Kingdom, and other Western countries are also currently facing.
Number 10. Meat cleaver murder. A 34-year-old man in Vermont killed his wife with a meat cleaver on the sidewalk in front of their house. It happened almost immediately after he was released from the hospital, where he had been kept over concerns about his mental health. He already had some dark and violent thoughts about his wife, and so he went for a mental health evaluation. The hospital found no reason to keep him against his will, though, and he was let go. When he returned to his house, he butchered his wife with a meat cleaver and then turned his fury on his mother-in-law. He would have killed her too if it wasn't for an armed bystander who drew a weapon and held the suspect until police arrived. The murderer was identified as Ata Gurung. He was arrested on October 12, 2017, for second-degree murder in the death of his wife. He was also charged with attempted murder of his mother-in-law. Luckily, the couple's 8-year-old daughter was at school at the time. She didn't have to see the horrific scene that unfolded at her home. Sadly, by the time the school day was over, one parent was dead and the other would be locked up for life, leaving the child with nobody but her severely wounded grandma. As for why Eta Gurung committed this unspeakable act, it likely happened because he was mentally unwell. He had been struggling with his sanity, but on that day he finally lost the battle and went completely off the deep end. Number 9. Brampton double stabbing. A Brampton man was given life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years after he beat and stabbed his wife, then beat and stabbed his mother-in-law. It happened when the three of them got into an argument over the couple's infant son in January of 2018. According to Superior Court Justice Kofi Barnes, Dalwinder Singh became furious after he learned that his wife and her mom were organizing a family gathering without his knowledge. They were putting together a celebration for the child, but Dalwinder wasn't told and he was angry because it would cost too much money. And so, within a short span of only 11 minutes, he butchered his wife, Baljit, and her mother, Avtar. It all happened just because Dalwinder didn't want to pay to host people at his house. He felt betrayed, bullied, and now he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. He was given 2 concurrent life sentences and will never see the light of day again. He also tried to cover his tracks by telling police the women attacked him. He claimed he had to defend himself by stabbing his wife 70 times and her mom 40 times. Number 8. Jeffrey Scullin. Jeffrey Scullin was accused of killing Melinda Pleskovich in 2017. Melinda was Jeffrey's mother-in-law, and she was found shot and stabbed just days before Jeffrey was set to be married to her daughter. Melinda was a 6th grade teacher in Strongsville, Ohio. She was found in her home on October 23rd by her husband Bruce and her soon-to-be son-in-law Jeffrey. They called 911 and claimed they had arrived at home to find Melinda dead in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor. Bruce told a 911 dispatcher, "I think someone killed my wife." To understand what happened here, we need to go back to the beginning. Anna and Jeffrey were scheduled to be married at the end of October. Jeffrey was already living with Anna and her parents. Right around the time Jeffrey moved in, money began to go missing. Then, when Jeffrey was home by himself one day, he claimed somebody tried to break in, but he scared them off. There were other bizarre events that only Jeffrey seemed to be aware of, like their car keys being stolen, alarms going off in the middle of the night, and nails being found inside tires. It was all very strange, and it only started when Jeffrey moved into the house. Then came the week before the wedding. Melinda received a phone call from the wedding venue saying that Jeffrey's card had been declined, even though he said he had already paid for the wedding. He was also supposed to send out the invitations, but he had never done that. On the 23rd, Jeffrey shot Anna's mother 3 times and stabbed her 35 times, then pretended like it had been a burglar. All the bizarre robbery attempts and suspicious behavior stopped immediately after the murder. It turned out Jeffrey was highly unstable and had been making everything up, likely to try and cover his tracks once he killed Melinda. At his hearing, Jeffrey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 33 years. He never did give a good reason for such a barbaric killing. Number 7. Jason Corbett. In 2015, Jason Corbett was killed by his wife and her father. Molly Corbett and her dad, Tom Martins, Tom being a former FBI agent, worked together to slaughter Jason. They used a brick paver and a baseball bat to beat Jason to death. They then tried to cover it up by saying they acted in self-defense because Jason tried to strangle Molly to death. They claimed Jason was abusive, when in fact, that was a blatant lie. Jason was a father of 2 who lived in Ireland. His first wife died from an asthma attack, and he was left alone with the kids. He needed help with the children, so he hired an au pair. The au pair was Molly Martins from Knoxville, Tennessee. She quickly went from being a nanny to his girlfriend, and shortly after they got married and moved to the US. But life in the US was not going well for Jason. He told his sister that he was unhappy and wanted to go back home to Ireland. He said his wife was acting strange, especially with the kids. She wanted Jason's children from his last marriage to call her mom and was desperate for their affection. When Jason began to make it known that he wanted to go back to Ireland, Molly worked together with her father to murder him. It was an unsuccessful attempt to keep Jason's children for herself and get rid of her pesky husband. In the end, Jason's wife and his father-in-law were charged with second-degree murder. Number 6. Deadly Christmas card exchange. A man admitted to the police that he killed his brother and his pregnant sister-in-law during a Christmas card exchange. This was over the holiday season of 2021. Brent Hansen from South Dakota confessed to the police that he snapped, lost his mind, and attacked the couple with a baseball bat and a machete. Brent had been living with his brother Clyde at a residential property they owned together, although they lived in separate living spaces. Living in such close proximity to his brother seemed to have been driving Brent crazy. On the morning of December 12th, Brent decided he had taken enough. He bludgeoned his brother in the head with a baseball bat, and when Jessica Hansen, his sister-in-law, showed up at the house, Brent struck her in the head with a machete, killing her and her unborn child. She was 9 months pregnant. To top it all off, Brent confessed to the murders while he was participating in a Christmas card exchange with the police chief. The chief had just gotten a call to do a welfare check on a house because a delivery driver had discovered blood on the door. Brent happened to be in the same room because he was delivering a Christmas card from his church. When he heard the call come in over the radio, he admitted casually that he had just killed. Brent has since been charged with 3 murders. Number 5. Zachary Curtis Ball. A 22-year-old man in West Virginia was locked behind bars in October of 2022 following a deadly dispute with his mother-in-law. Zachary Curtis Ball was taken into custody and charged with second-degree murder in the death of Lamanda Lynn Vance. According to deputies with the Logan County Sheriff's Office, they received a call at approximately 8:30 p.m. that they had an active shooter at a residence in Peck's Mill. When deputies arrived at the scene, they found Zachary had taken off into the dark toward the railroad tracks. After a short search, deputies found him hiding in a culvert and made the arrest. When the police talked to his wife, the victim of the woman Zachary shot in the face, she admitted it was a domestic dispute gone wrong. Zachary had gotten into a heated argument with his mother-in-law, then pulled out a gun and shot her without even thinking twice. He ditched the gun somewhere along the railroad tracks, and deputies had to go out with metal detectors to try and find it. But even without the gun, it's a clear-cut case of murder. Number 4. Catherine Magbanua. In late July of 2022, Catherine Magbanua from South Florida was sentenced to life behind bars without the possibility of parole. She was also given 2 consecutive 30-year terms, bringing her total sentence to life plus 60 years. Catherine received this sentence for the role she played in a murder-for-hire plot that saw a local law professor be shot down in cold blood. According to prosecutors, Catherine acted as the go-between for her ex-boyfriend, a dentist by the name of Charlie Adelson, and the man who was hired to kill law professor Daniel Markle. And it was all over some family drama. Daniel was in the middle of going through a divorce with Charlie's sister, Wendy, but the divorce was not going well. The pair had already disagreed and fought over court documents and issues, especially Wendy wanting to relocate to be closer to her family. Then on July 18, 2014, Daniel Markle was shot in his car. He had just dropped his kids off to daycare, went to the gym, then back home where he was ambushed and killed. While Daniel was going about his business that morning, he was being followed by a Toyota Prius. The man in the Prius was Sigfredo Garcia, who happened to be living with Catherine Magbanua. In fact, they have 2 children together. But Catherine had also been in a relationship with Charlie Adelson. Charlie wanted Daniel, his brother-in-law, out of the picture so that his sister wouldn't have to deal with such a messy divorce. And so Catherine set her ex-boyfriend up with her new boyfriend, who doubled as a hitman. Garcia and his accomplice, Luis Rivera, were charged with murder, as was Charlie Adelson. Everybody involved was caught and punished. Number 3. Vermont double murder. A single drop of blood recently led Vermont State Police to the arrest of Michael Anthony Louise, responsible for the double murder of George and Catherine Peacock in 1989. Michael was 79 years old when the police went knocking on his door in Syracuse and charged him with the crime. He got away with it for over 30 years. Back in 1989, George and Catherine were found inside their Danby home in Vermont, stabbed to death. There was no sign of any forced entry, no sign of a burglary, only a very obvious intent to kill. At the time, Michael was married to one of the Peacock's daughters. After their corpses were found, he was the main suspect. And although investigators were able to link Michael to the crime, there wasn't enough substantial evidence to mark him as the murderer. It wasn't until 2020 that Vermont police matched a single spot of blood found inside Michael's car to George Peacock using new DNA technology. It was a big enough breakthrough for them to make the arrest, with Michael now older than his victims at the time he killed them. Michael was jailed in New York pending extradition to Vermont to stand trial for the murders. Number 2. Bakersfield honor killing. In Bakersfield, California, a man named Jagjit Singh killed his daughter-in-law because she was threatening to bring dishonor upon his family. According to police documents, Jagjit became upset when his daughter revealed that she was having an affair with another man, cheating on Jagjit's son. She was threatening to leave the family, which he saw as unacceptable. But what really pushed him over the limit was when his daughter-in-law, Sumandeep Kaur Kuna, threatened that she would call the police and say that he tried to sexually assault her. With his personal honor at stake, Jagjit shot the 37-year-old woman 3 times in the neck and face. At his court hearing in October of 2019, Jagjit pleaded not guilty on account of he was defending the honor of his family. He was found guilty in 2022 and given 35 years to life. Number 1. Elizabeth Duncan. Elizabeth Ann Duncan was convicted of planning and executing the murder of her daughter-in-law in 1958. Elizabeth was the very last woman ever executed in California before the U.S. Supreme Court got rid of the death penalty in the state. Elizabeth never physically carried out the murders. Instead, she hired 2 young men in their 20s, Augustine Baldonado and Luis Moya, to do it for her. Her daughter-in-law was Olga Duncan, 7 months pregnant with Elizabeth's grandchild. Instead of watching her grandchild grow up, Elizabeth snuffed out that life and then was executed in a gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison on August 8, 1962. But why did Elizabeth Duncan do it? It's because she was unhealthily obsessed with her own son. When her son Frank said he wanted to move out of the apartment they shared and get his own place, Elizabeth overdosed on pills and almost died. The very nurse who cared for Elizabeth during her recovery from the overdose was Olga, who her son took a fancy to and then married in June of 1958. When Elizabeth learned that Olga was pregnant, she began to act irrational. She tried to kidnap Frank to get him away from the woman he loved, all because she couldn't stand to lose her son's attention to another woman. Do you think it would be scarier to be attacked by your mother-in-law or father-in-law? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Remember to hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and we'll see you soon for more great videos.